Welcome at the second day of the Organic Innovation Days. For those who joined us yesterday, I hope you found it interesting and that you have gained new insights, that you had a nice afternoon and a relaxing evening. For those that only joined today, welcome to the Organic Innovation Days indeed. Today we have two parallel sessions. You are in a parallel session opportunities for organics in Horizon Europe. If you wanted to join the Live Seed European workshop, then you are in the wrong session and then you can click on the other link in the agenda. So in this session, we will focus on Horizon Europe and in particular a new policy instrument, namely the missions and in particular the mission for soil health and food. First, we will have a keynote speech by Emile Frison, expert of IPES-Food, a member of the Mission Board for Soil Health and Food. Afterwards, we'll hear from the Commission their views and their plans for Horizon Europe. And after the break, we will have a policy debate. So now we have first Emile Frison. Please, Emile, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bram. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I will talk about the contribution of diversified agroecological systems and innovation within that for sustainable agriculture and food systems. I cannot move my slides, apparently. My slides don't move. Can I have some help, please?
Now it's moved. Yes, we see the next slide.
Yep. In the last 2 or 3 years, there's been an impressive number of major reports, including from IPBES, the IPCC report, the Global Sustainable Development Report, reports by the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition, and also recently the mission on soil health and food that was mentioned. They all call for transformational change. We cannot just continue with incremental changes to our current model of agriculture. And whether we start from underperforming subsistence agriculture or unsustainable industrial agriculture, we must converge towards diversified agroecological farming that is addressing the challenges that we are facing today. So we are talking about a different paradigm, a real transformation towards diversified agroecological systems. And that is a holistic, integrated approach to reach simultaneously economic, environmental, climate mitigation and adaptation, health, social, and cultural objectives. This can be characterized by a set of 10 elements of agroecology that have been produced by FAO 2 years ago. And they include things like diversity, resilience, synergies, recycling, etc. But also an important aspect is the co-creation and sharing of knowledge and taking into account human and social values, also culture and food traditions within the context of circular and solidarity economy and responsible governance. So this is really describing this new paradigm, and agroecology is therefore not just a set of agricultural practices or innovation among others, such as climate smart agriculture or nutrition sensitive agriculture or precision agriculture, that each have a specific objective, but rather it takes all the innovations that are compatible with these 10 elements and combine it with the traditional farmer knowledge through co-innovation. So it involves equally changing the social relations, empowering farmers, adding value locally, privileging short value chains, and reconnecting consumers with producers. So this new paradigm means that agroecology is not like some people say, yes, it's one tool in the toolbox and we must use all the tools. It is a different toolbox altogether. And within that, we select the set of practices that are adapted to the local conditions, identified through co-innovation. It has now been well demonstrated that from an economic point of view, these systems can produce equally well to conventional or industrial agriculture, that they generally produce a better income, and what is important, that they have a much better resilience and stability, which is very important and even more important today with the challenges of climate change. Just one slide about economic performance in a paper that was recently published about the European situation, where the economic performance in these different European countries of agroecological practices was between 15 and 110% better than conventional agriculture. Also, large numbers of farmers are already practicing different forms of agroecological innovations. And I'll take the case of India, where in Andhra Pradesh, there are already more than 600,000 farmers practicing this model of agriculture, and more than 1 million in the whole of India. And that we have seen there increases in productivity of about 20%, with a net income increase of about 50%. So this really shows that in different conditions, these systems can perform well. A recent study by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission has also analyzed the potential of agroecological practices in developing countries, showing the real potential of these systems. From an environmental point of view, it's really important, their contribution is really important because it allows to put carbon back in the soil and turning agriculture into a solution rather than a problem, which it is today. It's boosting biodiversity and, importantly, restoring degraded land. When we know that we have 1/3 of the agricultural land today that is degraded in the world, we cannot leave that aside and continue deforestation. We must restore these degraded lands, and that's where agroecology can do that. But also at the same time improve ecosystem services such as water recycling, nutrient recycling, pest and disease control, pollination, etc. Now, coming to the European situation, we have here in Europe also realized that the issue of soil health is a critical one, and one that has really is compromising our possibility to have sustainable agriculture in the future. And the European Commission decided to create a mission on soil health and food, and I'm a member of the mission board. The objective of the mission is really, which is called Caring for Soil is Caring for Life. And the mission aims to ensure that 75% of soils are healthy by 2030 for food, people, nature, and climate. This is an ambitious goal, but one that must be given priority considering the urgency of the transformational change that I was referring to. So what do we want to achieve in the mission? Well, at least 75% of all soils are either healthy or show a significant measurable improvement for all indicators, where the levels are below accepted levels. This can be achieved by a focus on reducing land degradation, which I mentioned already is a very important priority, with a goal to restore 50% of degraded land by 2030, conserving and increasing soil carbon with goals to increase by 0.1 to 0.4% per year. Also stop soil sealing and reuse non-agricultural land in urban areas, to reduce soil pollution and enhance restoration with a goal to have at least 25% of EU farmland under organic agriculture, and an additional 5 to 25% of land with reduced risk of eutrophication, reduced pesticides and antimicrobials, and doubling the rate of restoration of polluted sites to prevent erosion and stop erosion, to improve soil structure, but also to look at our impact on our global footprint in the goods that we are importing and reducing by 20 to 40% our global footprint with the import of material, and significantly improve soil literacy in member states. The people must know more why healthy soils are important. So how do we go about meeting those objectives? This will involve strategic research and innovation priorities. An important aspect is really a focus on transdisciplinarity and co-innovation. It will involve a dense network throughout all countries of Europe of living labs and lighthouses to innovate, to co-innovate with farmers and demonstrate the possibilities to other farmers. We've identified a set of 8 indicators that will be monitored to monitor the status of soil health. An important aspect is also to strengthen independent advisory service for farmers and foresters, which has been very much neglected in past years, and engaging the citizens and society at large. People in general must understand that we need to change the way that we are treating soil, and the consumers have a role to play there as well in buying the right kind of food that has been produced sustainably. And finally, of course, changing the policies that will provide incentives for the necessary changes. So agroecology is really contributing to achieving all of these objectives. And it's a system that represents a powerful approach, not only to improve soil health, but at the same and restore degraded land, but at the same time to contribute to better nutrition and health and improving the profitability of farmers. So a question is, with all that knowledge, how come that we are not seeing a more rapid transition towards these diversified agroecological systems? Well, we identified at IPES-Food a number of obstacles or lock-ins, and I don't have time to go through all of them in detail. You can find the detail in the IPES-Food report, from uniformity to diversity, but I will just highlight a few. Path dependency. If farmers have specialized in, let's say, cereal production, they have invested in equipment to specialize in these crops. The whole marketing and transport and storage facilities are adapted for that. And moving towards more diversified systems will require incentives to compensate for these investments that have been made. Another one is the feed the world narratives. We hear from people that have vested interest in maintaining the status quo that by 2050 we will be 9 billion, 10 billion people, and implicitly saying, and therefore we need to put more pesticides and more synthetic fertilizers in order to avoid starvation, omitting to say that there are sustainable alternatives to achieve the same result. A very important one also is the measures of success. As long as we only look at tons per hectare or yield of a given crop as the main indicator of success or the main objective, we will not be able to make the transition. We must look at what really matters to society, which is have better nutrition and have it accessible to people, to have more equitable livelihoods, total production, total biomass production, also the ecosystem services that are provided in agricultural systems that are not valued today. And finally, the consequence of the concentration of power that we see in agribusiness today, where just a few, mainly input providers, are controlling 50% up to 70% of the market and have a very strong influence on the policies in various countries. and this must be countered. So the good news is that the transition is really underway, and IPES-Food has produced a report on case studies demonstrating the potential of these approaches at a farm level, at a community level, at a regional level, and at a country level. And various other bodies have also been showing case studies. FAO has a whole website demonstrating this, and other organizations as well. What has been clear is that we need to have these changes implemented in multiple ways, with changes in production practices, but at the same time, changes in knowledge generation and transmission, changes in social and economic relations, changes in institutional frameworks. So, as a conclusion, we are, of course, starting from different starting points, whether we are in underperforming subsistence agriculture or in unsustainable industrial agriculture. But in both cases, we must converge towards these diversified agroecological systems that are sustainable. And what we don't want to see is, and which is still happening, unfortunately, is that unsustainable or underperforming subsistence agriculture is pushed to become following a model of industrial agriculture that is not sustainable. That should not continue. So with that, I am concluding here, and I thank you for your attention, and I am available to answer any questions.
Thanks a lot, Emile, for your presentation and for putting so clearly the challenges that are ahead of us, in particular for restoring soil health, but also to make agriculture more environmental friendly and more diversified, and what agroecology can contribute to this. I think you rightly pointed out that agroecology is not just another tool, but a different toolbox. And to explain or to help farmers to implement this toolbox, they would need advice. And there's a question from the audience: what support advisors and facilitators can provide to farmers to implement these new practices, and also what support these advisors can receive in order that they are able to help the farmers? Could you comment on that, please?
Well, unfortunately, still the education system in agricultural science is largely focused on what I would call the industrial model of agriculture, where we are optimizing the application of synthetic fertilizers. We are showing which pesticides to use for which pests, etc. But fortunately, more and more programs of agroecology and research on organic agriculture are developing in different parts of the world. But what is important is that we move away from a model where research is first done in a laboratory and then on experimental fields, and then are passed on to farmers with, you shall do this. And that doesn't work. I think that has been well demonstrated. And that's why we have to move towards participatory research and co-innovation, which has really been demonstrated to be very powerful at adapting local solutions to local problems, and not come up with a technology that was thought to be a silver bullet, but doesn't answer the questions that farmers have under their circumstances. So a change in the way that we approach innovation through co-innovation and marrying scientific knowledge with the knowledge of the farmers and their own local circumstances.
Thanks a lot, Emile, for this clarification. There are two more questions about the health status of soils. So there is quite ambitious targets to achieve soil health in 10 years. But what do we know about the current soil health? Is there any reference study or reference data about what is the current status of soil health, and to be able to compare that and where we need to go to?
Well, it is estimated that more than half, or probably 2/3 of our current soils are degraded to some extent, some of it severely degraded. And of course, saying we want to have 75% of soil healthy in 10 years is very ambitious. And people are saying, well, is that possible? There is an enormous amount still of knowledge to be developed, especially regarding the soil biome. In the past, soil science has been dominated by soil physics and soil chemistry, and not enough attention has been spent on soil biology, while we know now that really healthy soils are soils that have a very diverse and rich soil microbiome. And the potential of the soil microbiome to fix carbon in the soil, it's not just by bringing organic material to the field that you fix carbon in the soil. It's much more through the microorganisms that are taking the exudates from plants and fixing it into humus in the soil. And I think the relationship between the diversity and the richness of the soil microbiome and the diversity of plants is one area that has, in recent years, shown tremendous potential, where we've seen very rapid increases in soil health, improvements in soil health, by having a much greater diversity of plants, which allowed a greater diversity and greater numbers of soil microbes to be present in the soil, and that play a key role in increasing carbon in the soil.
Okay, so you seem to be confident that these ambitious targets of reaching 75% healthy soils by 2030 can be achieved if we have the right research in place and if we have the right instruments in place to help farmers to adopt these new practices. Because indeed, it's only 10 years, meaning 2 crop rotation cycles. What else is needed? Are there enough financial means also connected to this to make these great investments?
Well, it will all depend on where the financial means are invested. I must say I'm still quite disappointed with the current, the way the current common agricultural policy seems to be going, where still a substantial part of the investments are going on the basis of a per hectare subsidy. And where not enough is linked to really practices that improve soil health. I think if the entire investment in agriculture through the Common Agricultural Policy budget was allocated to support improvements, I think we can achieve these goals. It will all depend on the incentives that are given to farmers. We cannot expect farmers to take on the responsibility of doing that if they don't have the necessary incentives and the necessary support to do that. So that will require a redirection of a more significant part of the agricultural budgets that support this transformation, but also a much greater investment in the extension services that should work in this form of co-innovation. Many farmers in Europe and elsewhere get their advice principally now from input suppliers that tell them which variety to plant, which fertilizer to put at which stage, and which pesticide to spray at which stage. And that is the only advice they are getting. And farmers almost become tractor drivers to implement that. So we must really rehabilitate their role as co-innovators with independent research and extension.
Indeed, the role of farmers is crucial, and they need to be supported and get the right incentives. But in your talk, you also mentioned the need for new institutional arrangements to enhance agroecology. Could you explain a bit more what you mean with these new institutional arrangements?
Well, I think it is the involvement also of farmers in in setting the policies that will influence their world. There has been too little empowerment of farmers in deciding their future, and I think that is one very important aspect if you want to see the necessary changes to take place. So it's not just decisions that are being made at the national level. It must be really involving farmers at the local level, and recreating also the links between consumers and producers. And where we are seeing a lot of innovation taking place is exactly in that, with shorter value chains that provide for better income by farmers, more healthy food for the consumers, and where people again start to understand where their food comes from and not just from the supermarket, and where people will make that will influence the choices that people make about the food they buy. So it's really looking at not only farmers in isolation, but the role of farmers with consumers in society.
Thanks a lot. There are no more questions coming from the audience, so I invite again everybody to post questions in the chat if you have any. In the meantime, I can ask another question. We are the Organic Innovation Days, so we are of course really interested also to hear about organic. You didn't mention it in your talk, but we see organic farmers in Europe as the pioneers of agroecology. They are usually organic farmers that are the first ones to implement agroecological practices and also to further develop them. So how do you see this relationship between organic farmers and agroecology?
Well, you are absolutely right, and if you look at the basic principles of organic farming, going back to the origin of organic agriculture, it is really very close to the 10 elements of agroecology, and so the commonalities are very great. The reason why I'm not just mentioning it is because we are seeing an increasing tendency now that the organic market has expanded rapidly with 2-digit growth figures per year. We are seeing a greater interest in industrializing organic agriculture. And just because something is certified organic doesn't mean it has been produced sustainably, and doesn't mean that the social conditions in which it has been produced are equitable or just. And when you have conditions that are unfortunate, but that do exist, where things are certified organic, but the workers that are employed, this often seasonal workers that are employed, that are underpaid, that live in miserable conditions, I think we must find a way to distinguish organic production that has been following all the principles of organic farming and the as I said, equivalent to the 10 elements of agroecology, from the misuse and I would say a co-optation of the term to just satisfy the minimum requirements for certification, but not caring about the basic principles of organic agriculture.
Thanks a lot for this explanation. Yeah, unfortunately, there are indeed in some cases organic production that is perhaps not really connected to the original principles, but hopefully the debate around agroecology can also inspire these organic farmers to do better. There is one final question before we go to the next speaker, and that is, where do you think there are the biggest research needs for agroecology with regard to animal farming?
Well, I think we must really move away from the industrial production of animals that are causing not only environmental risks, but also are of concern from the point of view of the origin of zoonosis. But the reintroduction of animals in diversified farming systems is a much more sustainable way, and one that allows also for nutrient recycling and the diversification that goes along with that. So I think moving away from the industrial production of meat and dairy towards reintegrating that into diversified systems where the feeding of the animals is based on things that are not essentially grain-fed, and where we compete with human nutrition, but going back to use animals to bring in food that is not edible, or using food that is not edible by humans, and therefore complementing the human nutrition rather than competing with production for food.
Thanks a lot, Emile, for your contribution and for answering all the questions from the audience. If we were in a real live event, I would ask for a round of applause now. I will just do it this way, and I hope the others can do that also from their homes. We will go now to Susana Gauno-Sayes, who is Research Programming Officer at the Research